I used to think the coldest thing I'd ever feel was a Seattle winter. I was wrong. The coldest thing I've ever felt is my own father's hand on my arm, shoving me and my grandfather out the front door on Christmas night, like we were a problem to be taken to the curb. My name is Harper Lane. I'm 28. And last Christmas, everything I thought I knew about family cracked right down the middle at our dining table. Picture this: crystal glasses, gold-rimmed plates, a centerpiece that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a playlist humming softly in the background. My father, Daniel Lane, at the head of the table, hosting his annual perfect family Christmas for his business friends and their spouses. My stepmother, Lydia, smiling so wide her cheeks looked painful. People laughing, pretending they didn't feel the tension you could slice with the carving knife. And at the far end, my grandfather, George, in his wheelchair, his hands shaking but his tie perfectly straight because he'd asked me 3 times if he looked presentable. I'd been invited out of obligation, not affection. My tiny apartment in the city usually didn't make the guest list. But this year, they needed the dutiful daughter picture for the clients. So there I was, in a dress I'd bought on sale with my diner tips, trying not to spill red wine on the white tablecloth. Every time Grandpa's fork clinked against his plate, my father's jaw tightened. It happened so fast it didn't feel real. Grandpa's hand trembled, and a little piece of turkey slipped off his fork, landing on the pristine silk table runner. It made this soft, stupidly small sound. I went to reach for a napkin, already ready to joke it off, but my father's chair scraped back so hard it screeched over the music. "That's it," he snapped, standing up so suddenly half the table jumped. His face went red in that way I've always hated, like anger lived just under his skin. "If you can't keep that useless old man under control, get out. Both of you." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. "Dad, what are you?" He didn't let me finish. He grabbed the handles of Grandpa's wheelchair and shoved it back from the table so hard it jolted his whole body. Glasses rattled. Conversation died. I saw guests look down at their plates, pretending to straighten napkins, staring anywhere but at us. "Daniel," Lydia hissed under her breath, but she didn't stand up. She didn't move. "Dad, stop." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off like I was a fly. The next thing I knew, he was pushing Grandpa toward the front hall, and then his hand was clamped around my upper arm, fingers digging into my skin. We barely had our coats when the door flew open, and the December air hit us like a slap. Snowflakes blew in, dusting Grandpa's hair, clinging to his eyebrows. I turned back toward the warmth, toward the smell of roast and wine and music. "Dad, open the door," I said, voice shaking. "Grandpa could freeze out here." Inside, I heard clinking glasses, someone asking, "What's going on?" "Nothing," my father's voice replied, sharp and ice cold. "Just taking the trash out." Trash. He meant us. The door slammed. The deadbolt clicked. The porch light stayed on like nothing had happened. I didn't feel the cold at first. Shock is weirdly warm, like your body tries to pretend you're okay for a few more seconds. Snow gathered in Grandpa's lap, melting into the thin hospital blanket I tucked around his legs. His breathing went shallow the way it does when he's scared and trying to hide it. "Harper," he whispered, his voice thin in the wind. "Are you all right?" I was. Throat burned, my heart was beating so hard it hurt, and my ears felt like they were full of cotton. But I nodded anyway, because someone had to be the adult on that porch, and it clearly wasn't my father. Behind us, through the frosted window, people went back to their conversation. The music turned up a little. Someone laughed. No one opened the door. No one came after us. "Come on," I said quietly, kneeling to straighten the blanket over Grandpa's knees with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. "I'll take you home." He rested his trembling hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted you to see this." I'd already seen it. The way my father's eyes slid off Grandpa whenever he spoke. The way he introduced him as my father-in-law instead of his father. The way Lydia flinched when Grandpa knocked his glass over. And the way the guests always pretended not to see any of it. As I pushed his wheelchair down the icy stone steps, snow crunching under my boots, one thought settled into my chest with the heaviness of wet concrete. Whatever that house was, it was no longer my home. And I had no idea that being thrown into the cold that night was the first step toward finding out my grandfather had a secret worth $2.3 billion, and that my father had built his entire life on a lie. By the time we got back to my place, the heater decided to give up on life again. It always did that. 2 sad clicks, a cough, then silence. I remember standing in the doorway of my tiny apartment on Rainier Avenue, breath visible in the air, thinking, perfect timing. "Sit tight, Grandpa," I said, rolling him inside. The peel of paint on the doorframe scraped the side of his wheelchair. "I'll put the kettle on." He nodded, trying to smile even as his lips went a little bluish. "I've survived colder nights than this, kiddo," he said. His voice was full of bravado, but his fingers fumbled with the blanket. My living room was embarrassing, honestly. A sagging thrift store couch, a coffee table I'd rescued from the alley, a kitchenette with one flickering bulb, and cupboards that groaned when you opened them. It looked even smaller after walking out of a house with a 2-story chandelier. I caught him looking around, and my stomach twisted, but his face wasn't judgmental. It was wounded, on my behalf. "Harper," he said softly, "I shouldn't be here. I'm a burden. Put me in a nursing home." "No," I said immediately, sharper than I meant to. The words snapped through the air. I moved in front of his chair and took his cold hands in mine. "You're not going anywhere. You're staying with me." His eyes glistened. He blinked a few times like he was trying to push the emotion back where it came from. That night, I pulled leftovers from my diner shift out of the fridge. Half a roasted chicken, mashed potatoes I'd boxed up because something in me knew we might need them. I reheated them on the stove that tilted slightly to the left and fed him slowly, ignoring his protests that he could do it himself as his hands shook. "Harper, you're working too much," he murmured between bites. "I'm fine," I lied. The truth was, I was holding my life together with duct tape and caffeine. Morning shifts, waiting tables at the diner, then stocking shelves at the grocery store until midnight. My legs ached constantly. My hands were cracked from dishwater and cheap soap, and sleep came in fragmented pieces between alarm clocks. But rent, Grandpa's medications, food, they didn't care how tired I was. Around 2 a.m, after washing the last dish, I dragged out the little folding cot I'd bought for nights like this and set it up next to his chair. The apartment had this faint hum of the fridge, the occasional car passing outside. I lay down, muscles humming with exhaustion. I felt his hand reach down, fingers brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "You shouldn't sacrifice your life for me," he whispered. I swallowed hard and stared up at the cracked ceiling. "I'm not sacrificing anything," I said. "You're my only real family." A tear slid down his cheek. I pretended not to see it. "If you'd asked me then, I would have told you that was rock bottom. Two people huddled in a freezing, too small apartment, sharing leftovers and borrowed blankets, abandoned by the man who was supposed to protect us. I had no idea we were standing on the edge of something much bigger. A few weeks passed. I fell into a rhythm: work, meds, checkups, making Grandpa laugh with dumb stories from the diner. I avoided my father's name like it was a curse word. Then one Sunday morning, when I actually had a day off, Grandpa cleared his throat as I was scrubbing a mug in the sink. "Harper," he said, voice unusually steady. "Can you drive me somewhere today?" I froze, dish halfway to the rack. "Where?" He hesitated for half a beat. "You'll see." There was something different in his tone. Not the usual apologetic softness, but a kind of resolve. Like he'd made up his mind about something important. I helped him into the passenger seat of my beat-up hatchback, buckled his blanket around his legs like we were going on some tiny road trip, then wrestled his wheelchair into the trunk. When I started the engine, he placed his hand lightly on my arm. "Go left," he said. "Grandpa, seriously, where are we going? Trust me, Harper." We drove through the parts of Seattle I knew like the lines on my palm. The route to the diner, the supermarket, the discount pharmacy. Then we kept going. The buildings got taller and cleaner, the sidewalks wider, the cars more expensive. We passed neighborhoods I'd only ever seen from the bus. "Grandpa," I tried again, watching him out of the corner of my eye. He just stared straight ahead, jaw set, eyes shining with something I couldn't name. Finally, we turned onto a tree-lined road I didn't recognize. At the end of it stood an iron gate that looked like it belonged in a movie. Tall, black, intricate scrollwork curling across the top. I slowed automatically. "Grandpa, this is someone's estate," I said. "We can't just—" The gates swung open on their own. Two security guards stepped out of a small booth, uniforms crisp, posture straight. My heart jumped into my throat. I fumbled to put the car in reverse, convinced we were about to be told to turn around. Instead, one of them stepped forward, looked past me into the car, and his eyes widened. "Welcome home, Mr. Lane," he said. "We've been informed you might return." "Welcome home, Mr. Lane." I stared at the guard, then at Grandpa. He gave me a small, almost sheepish smile. "Drive on, sweetheart," he said quietly. The driveway wound through manicured lawns and rose gardens, past marble statues and fountains that tossed water into the air like sparkling glass. It felt like driving into another world. At the end of the drive sat a mansion, so big I genuinely thought it was a boutique hotel at first. Cream stone walls, huge arched windows, a roof that went on forever. My foot slammed on the brake without my brain's permission. "Grandpa," I said, voice thin. "Whose house is this?" He looked at me with eyes that were both proud and unbearably sad. "Ours," he said. The front doors swung open before I could even process that word. A woman in a black suit, elegant, severe, early 60s maybe, rushed out. Her hair was pulled into a perfect bun, every step precise. When she reached Grandpa's side, she dropped to her knees, took his hand, and pressed it to her forehead. "Master George," she said, her voice breaking. "You're back. We have waited so many years." "Master." I stared at him like I'd never seen him before. "Grandpa," I whispered. "What is going on?" He squeezed my fingers. "Inside," he murmured. "It's time you knew what your father stole from us." Inside, the mansion felt like another planet. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting soft light over marble floors that probably cost more than my car. A line of staff stood along the hallway: housekeepers, groundskeepers, a chef in a white coat, heads bowed slightly as we passed. "Good afternoon, sir." "Welcome home, Mr. Lane." My ears rang. "Why are they calling you that?" I asked under my breath as I pushed his wheelchair down the hallway. He didn't answer. Not yet. Entered an office at the back of the house, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking rolling hills, and a lake I didn't even know existed this close to the city. The room smelled like leather, old books, and something else, pine maybe. On the wall hung framed blueprints, black and white photos of construction sites, and a huge aerial shot of what looked like an entire resort complex. "Sit, Harper," Grandpa said quietly, gesturing to a leather chair opposite his desk. I sat. The chair nearly swallowed me. For a moment, he just watched me, eyes glassy but determined, as if deciding where to start. "I should have told you long ago," he said finally, voice rough. "But your father took the truth from you before you were even born." My heartbeat kicked into overdrive. "Dad," he nodded slowly, gaze drifting to an old blueprint on the wall. "Daniel wasn't always like this, but greed gets into a man like rust. You don't notice it until the metal's weak." "Grandpa, please," I said, leaning forward. "Just tell me," he inhaled, like he was dragging memories up from the bottom of a well. 40 years ago, he began, I built a company out of nothing. Lane Properties Group. Hotels, high-end apartments, timberland, commercial complexes. If you could build it, we probably had a stake in it. He pointed at the blueprints and photos. By the time your father turned 30, the company was worth close to $1 billion. I made him CFO. I wanted him to have what I never had. My stomach twisted. I could already see the shape of the story coming, and I hated it. He started leaking deals, Grandpa continued, giving competitors access to our blueprints, funneling money into private accounts, signing my name on documents I'd never seen. His jaw tightened. When I confronted him, he looked me in the eye and said the company would be better off when the old man finally dies. My hands clenched on the armrests. "He said that to you?" Grandpa's eyes shone with something between rage and grief. "Not long after that, my car was forced off the road one night, driving back from a site visit. The room went still. "What?" I whispered. "I never proved anything," he said quietly. "No cameras, no witnesses, just a truck that appeared out of nowhere and didn't stop. I woke up in a hospital, couldn't move my legs, and your father didn't visit. I felt physically sick. So the accident, yes," he said simply. "That's why I'm in this chair." Silence stretched between us. He looked smaller sitting there, like telling the story had shaved years off him. "But I didn't die," he said, voice firming. And that, I think, was his mistake. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, the kind that made that heavy thump when it hit wood. He slid it towards me. "I rebuilt," he said, quietly, carefully. "This time in my name only. No Lane Properties logo. No public profile. I used shell companies, different brands. I let your father think I'd faded into the background while I built something bigger from the shadows." I opened the folder. Inside were deeds, ownership papers, balance sheets. I scanned phrases. Mountain Ridge Timber, Montana. Harbor Light Towers, Seattle. Suncrest Resort, Colorado. Riverside Market District, Florida. "I own 109 properties across the country," he said, a faint, almost shy pride in his voice. "And the portfolio, last valued, is worth just over $2.3 billion. My vision tunneled. "You're a billionaire," I breathed. He shook his head and reached into the drawer again, pulling out a second folder, this one with a gold seal. He placed it gently in front of me. My name was printed across the top. "Harper Elise Lane." "Not anymore," he said. "You are." I slapped a hand over my mouth. "What?" "It's my will," he said, eyes softening. Everything I own goes to you. Tears burned behind my eyes. Why me? I whispered. Why not him? He's your son. Grandpa reached across the desk with a trembling hand and cupped my cheek. Because you are the only one who loved me when I had nothing, he said. You shared your leftovers when you could barely afford them. You pushed me through the snow the night your father threw us away. And you never once asked what I could do for you. His voice cracked. You, Harper, not Daniel. You are my family. The dam broke. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead into his hand, sobs shaking my shoulders. I don't want your money, I choked. I just want you. I know, he whispered. That's exactly why you deserve it. He tapped the second folder. This, he said, isn't just the will. It's every crime your father committed. Emails, bank transfers, forged contracts, audio recordings. 2 decades of evidence. I kept it all, waiting for the right person to have it. I stared at the neat stack of pages and the small USB drive clipped inside. It felt heavier than lead. I'm giving you the choice I never had, Grandpa said quietly. You can walk away. Start fresh with this inheritance and never look back. Or you can expose him. Whatever you decide, I'll stand with you. I looked from the will to the evidence, back to his face. The man my father had tried to erase. The man he'd broken and then discarded. And somewhere beneath the waves of anger and hurt, something cold and clear settled. This wasn't just about money. It was about what kind of person I refused to let myself become. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face at the head of the Christmas table, heard his voice saying, taking the trash out, saw the snow collecting on Grandpa's blanket. Then layered on top of that, the sound of Grandpa saying, you are my family, and the number 2.3 billion stamped across legal paper. In the gray light of morning, I made coffee the way Grandpa liked it, 2 teaspoons of sugar, a splash of cream, and brought it into the office. He was already awake, sitting by the window, staring out at the lake. You're thinking about him, he said without looking at me. I set the cup down, my hands wrapped around my own mug like a lifeline. I need to see him, I said. He nodded slowly. Take the folders, he said. The evidence too. Yes, Harper. He needs to see exactly what he threw away. There was a weight to his words that made my chest tighten. I slid both thick folders into a leather briefcase, the kind executives carry. As I stepped towards the door, he reached out and gripped my wrist, surprisingly strong. Whatever happens, he said, eyes locked on mine. Remember this. Your worth was never tied to that man's approval. I nodded, even as my heart hammered like it wanted to sprint out of my body. Driving back to the Lane house felt like entering a crime scene. The mansion looked the same from the outside, but it didn't feel big anymore. It felt empty, like I could see every crack in the marble. I rang the bell. Lydia answered, barefoot in a silk robe. Mascara smudged just enough to say she'd been crying, but not enough to ruin the look. When she saw me, her expression hardened. You, she hissed. What are you doing here? I walked past her. Where's Dad? You can't just barge in. Where is he? He stepped out of the living room before she could answer. No suit this time, just a wrinkled button-down and sweatpants. A half-empty glass of whiskey dangled from his hand, even though it was barely 11. Oh, he said, letting out a humorless laugh. Look who crawled back. I didn't crawl, I said, setting the briefcase on the glass coffee table. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I came to give you a chance. He snorted. A chance from you. He took a step closer, eyes bloodshot, breath sharp with alcohol. You ungrateful little brat. I gave you a life, and you chose that wheelchair-bound parasite over your own father. My fists clenched. Stop calling him that. Then what do you want? He snapped. Money, an apology. You think you can guilt trip me into pretending he didn't poison you against me? I popped the clasps on the briefcase. The sound cut through his rant like a crack of thunder. I want you to confess, I said. He froze. Lydia's face went pale. She took a tiny step back. To confess what? He demanded, though his voice had lost its edge. I opened the first folder and slid a set of printed emails across the table. Leaking company intel. Selling our designs to competitors. Signing approvals in Grandpa's name. He snatched the top page, scanning it. This is fake. Then explain the bank transfers you authorized, I said, laying out another sheet. The ones that go from company accounts to the shell companies in your name. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel, she whispered. He flung the paper back at me. You have no idea what you're talking about. That old man is lying to you. Then how about this? I pulled out the USB drive and set it gently between us. Recordings of you saying you wished he'd die already so you could run things properly. Of you calling him a burden while using his name to sign contracts. For a second, I saw naked panic in his eyes. Then it twisted into rage. He lunged forward, grabbing pages off the table, ripping them in half, shredding them, pieces fluttering to the floor. It's all lies, he shouted. He's senile. He's manipulating you because he knows you're weak. I didn't flinch. I just watched him tear his own future into strips. You had a chance to fix this, I said quietly. You could have come clean. You could have apologized. You could have done anything other than throw him into the snow and call us trash. He stopped, chest heaving. You chose him over me, he hissed. You never gave me a father to choose, I replied. Silence slammed into the room. His nostrils flared. Lydia's eyes darted between us like she was watching a tennis match from hell. What's that? He finally asked, nodding toward the other folder, the one with the gold seal. The will, I said. He gave a bitter laugh. What will? His disability check. The house he doesn't even really own. He owned more than you think, I said, sliding the top page toward him. His gaze fell on the number printed in clean black ink. 2,300,450,109 titled properties. I watched the color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. No, he whispered. No, this is fake. He doesn't have that. He can't have that. He rebuilt, I said, without you. And he left all of it to me. Not to me. His voice cracked, shooting up half an octave. I'm his son. You're also the one who tried to run his life and maybe his car off the road, I shot back. He told me you stopped being family long before I was born. He staggered back a step like I'd physically hit him. Lydia grabbed his arm. Daniel, say something, she pleaded. She can't take it all. You're the heir. You're his blood. He chose character over blood, I said. You're finally registered on his face. Real, sharp, bottom of the stomach fear. You listen to me, he growled, stepping so close I could smell the whiskey. If you take this to the police, if you ruin me, I swear to God, Harper, you'll do what? I asked softly. Throw me out again. Take away my room. There's nothing left you can take from me. His shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second. Then he straightened, grasping for one last line. I'm your father, he said, desperation bleeding through the anger. I closed the briefcase with a slow, deliberate zip. You stopped being my father the night you chose your image over your own dad's life, I said. Lydia started to cry. My father reached out like he might grab my arm again, but I stepped back out of reach. This was your last chance, I said. Then I picked up the briefcase and walked out of the house that had never really been mine. Behind me, I heard something shatter. Maybe the whiskey glass. Maybe something inside him that took far too long to break. I didn't turn turn around. I drove straight to the only person I trusted to know what to do next. My childhood friend, Michael Reyes, had gone from the kid who traded lunch snacks with me to a federal prosecutor in a suit that actually fit. When he saw me walk into his office with a briefcase clutched to my chest, his easy smile faded. "Harper," he said slowly, "what's in the case?" "Everything," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. He opened it. 5 minutes later, he'd stopped blinking. 10 minutes later, he swore under his breath. "Harper," he said, looking up at me with eyes that were suddenly very sober, "this isn't just embezzlement. This is corporate fraud, wire fraud, tax crimes, forged signatures, attempted sabotage of a parent's business. This is career-making, prison-level stuff." "I know," I said. "Once I file this," he said, leaning forward, "there is no quietly taking it back." "Are you sure?" I closed my eyes. Snow on Grandpa's blanket. My father's voice saying trash. The hospital bills. The years of silence. When I opened them, something in me had gone from shaking to still. "Do it," I said. 3 days later, the world shifted. I was in the garden behind Grandpa's mansion, reading to him from one of his old engineering books while he dozed in the sun, when Mrs. Alden, the house manager with the perfect bun, came rushing out, tablet in hand. "Miss Harper," she said, breathless, "you need to see this." The headlines screamed across the screen. Breaking. FBI raids Lane Holdings headquarters. Footage showed agents in navy jackets pouring through the revolving doors of my father's downtown office tower. Yellow tape went up. Employees stood outside clutching coffee cups, watching in stunned silence as boxes and hard drives were rolled out. Then the camera cut to him. Daniel Lane, my father, hands cuffed behind his back, hair mussed, expensive coat hanging crooked, being led through the lobby he used to stride through like a king. Reporters clustered around the steps like a pack. "Mr. Lane, do you have any comment on the charges? Did you steal from your own father's company? Is it true your daughter turned over evidence?" He didn't answer. He looked like someone had vacuumed all the air out of him. For half a second, his eyes locked on the camera, and by extension, on me. There it was again, rage, disbelief, and something new, terror. Then the agents pushed him into the back of a black SUV, closed the door, and drove away. Beside me, Grandpa's hand tightened on his armrest. His mouth trembled, not in satisfaction, not in serves him right, in grief. "My son," he whispered. "He could have chosen honesty. He could have chosen family. But he chose greed, Harper, and greed always collapses." I put my hand over his. "He hurt you," I said. "He hurt us both. You didn't deserve any of it." Tears rolled down Grandpa's cheeks. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "You saved the legacy he tried to poison." The news didn't stop. The next day, Lydia showed up at the federal building in oversized sunglasses and a coat that looked more like armor than clothing. Cameras flashed. "Mrs. Lane, did you know about your husband's crimes? Are you being charged as well? Do you blame your stepdaughter?" "She's lying," Lydia cried as agents ushered her inside. "Harper is trying to ruin us. My husband is innocent." The anchors on TV didn't sound convinced. "Anonymous sources," they said, "confirm that evidence was submitted by Lane's own daughter." My phone might as well have been a bomb. Calls, texts, voicemails piled up. I turned it off. Instead, I sat with Grandpa on the couch while cable news detailed every count: fraud, forgery, tax evasion, asset manipulation. The words "maximum sentence" and "decades" hung in the air like smoke. If this were a different kind of story, I'd tell you I felt victorious. That watching him led away in cuffs was sweet. But the truth is more complicated. I felt relief. I felt anger. And somewhere, tiny and unwelcome, I felt grief for the father I never really had, and for the boy he must have been before greed hollowed him out. The trial came 2 months later, in that soggy in-between season where winter gives up, but spring hasn't fully arrived. The downtown courthouse became our second home. Every morning, I helped Grandpa into his nicest jacket, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and wheeled him past marble columns and metal detectors to the same worn wooden bench. He insisted on being there. "I need to hear the truth spoken out loud," he said. On the first day, they brought my father in wearing an orange jumpsuit. The man who used to criticize the shine on my shoes now shuffled in foam slippers. His arrogance seemed to have leaked out somewhere between the jail and the courtroom. He looked smaller, pale, the lines on his face deeper. He scanned the room, but never quite met our eyes. The charges were read out one by one. Wire fraud, corporate fraud, forgery, tax evasion, attempted sabotage of a parent's business. Each phrase felt like someone hammering a nail into the coffin of the man he could have been. Michael stood at the prosecutor's table, shoulders squared, voice steady. He walked the jury through emails projected on a screen, recorded calls, where my father's voice dripped contempt, bank transfers that traced stolen money like footprints in the snow. Former employees took the stand, hands trembling as they described intimidation, threats, shady orders. At one point, the defense attorney tried to suggest Grandpa's memory was faulty. "Mr. Lane," he said, leaning in, "given your age and medical history, is it possible your recollection of events from 20 years ago is confused?" Grandpa stared at him with a clarity I'll never forget. "My body is failing," he said slowly, "but my memory of my son telling me the company would be better off when I was dead is very clear." You could have heard a pin drop. On the 4th day, my father finally looked at us. Really looked. His gaze landed on Grandpa first, took in the wheelchair, the oxygen tube, the deep lines etched by stress and time. His mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders shook once, just barely. Shame flickered across his face like lightning before he dropped his eyes. On the 7th day, the judge delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. 22 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Lydia sobbed into a tissue, mascara streaking. My father swayed slightly, gripping the table. Before the bailiff led him away, he turned again, eyes locking on Grandpa's. "Dad," he said, voice hoarse and small, nothing like the booming man who'd once commanded boardrooms and Christmas tables. "I'm sorry." Grandpa closed his eyes. 2 tears escaped, but he didn't speak. The door clanged shut behind my father. Just like that, the man who tossed us into the snow was the one behind glass and steel. You'd think that would be the end of the story. But life doesn't put credits over the first big twist. After the trial, Grandpa's health slid downhill faster than I was ready for. First, it was more coughing. Then he tired easily. Then he needed help just sitting up. I moved my bed into his room and slept on a cot beside him again, like that first night in my apartment. Only now the walls were high ceilings, and the blankets were thick and soft. Every night, he'd reach out, searching for my hand in the dark. I'd hold it until he fell asleep. "Harper," he whispered one night, his voice barely above a breath. "I'm here," I said. "Don't let this darkness define you," he murmured. "I won't," I promised. "I have you." One corner of his mouth lifted. "One day you won't," he said gently. My chest tore a little at the edges. "Don't talk like that." He reached up, fingers shaky, and touched my cheek. "You gave me more life than I expected to have," he said. "More love than my own son. You'll carry this family forward, not with wealth, with heart." "I love you, Grandpa," I whispered. "I know," he said. The morning he didn't wake up, the room was full of soft spring light. I brought in his oatmeal and tea like always, set the tray down, and said his name. He lay there with the faintest smile, hand resting on the edge of the bed where my cot usually was, like he'd fallen asleep reaching for me and never stopped. I took his hand, pressed it to my forehead, and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in years. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." We buried him beneath a simple stone, the way he wanted. No TV cameras, no corporate fanfare, just a pine casket, white flowers, and a crowd of people whose lives he'd touched in ways I'd never known about. Warehouse workers he'd given second chances to, a maid from one of his hotels whose kids' tuition he'd secretly paid, a retired contractor who said, "He saved my house when the bank tried to take it." 3 days later, the attorney read the will officially. When he announced the number, heads lifted. When he said my name as sole heir, some people nodded like they already knew. Others wiped their eyes. I didn't feel like an heiress. I felt like someone holding a torch that had to be carried carefully, or it could burn everything down. I threw myself into work, not my old diner jobs, but into the thing Grandpa had built. I renamed the umbrella company Lane Legacy Group. I sat in boardrooms full of older men who looked at me like I was an intern, until I started asking questions they weren't prepared for. We rolled out scholarships for employees' kids, ethics policies that actually meant something, initiatives Grandpa had scribbled in notebooks but never lived to implement. I walked through our properties and asked janitors, receptionists, line cooks how long they'd been there, what they needed. They were always a little shocked, I asked. It made me wonder how often my father had walked past them without seeing them at all. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I met Evan Blake, an architect consulting on the renovation of one of our older buildings. He had this quiet way about him, like the world moved loud, but he didn't. At our first meeting, he looked at me, really looked, and said, "You look exhausted. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" I laughed so hard I snorted coffee, which was mortifying. But it also broke something loose. We started getting coffee after meetings, talking about blueprints and grief, and how weird it is when your life changes overnight. He never once asked me about the number in my accounts. He asked about Grandpa and about the girl who once slept on a cot next to a wheelchair. We didn't fall into some instant fairy tale. It was slow, careful, honest. A year later, when I held our son, Henry, in my arms for the first time, I cried not because I was afraid, but because it felt like the world had finally come full circle. I whispered into his tiny ear, "You'll know who your great-grandfather was. I promise." On the first anniversary of Grandpa's death, we held the inaugural George Lane Honor Scholarship ceremony in a hall packed with kids who reminded me of younger me. Working too much, carrying too much, hoping for a break. I stood on stage, heart pounding, looking out at hundreds of faces. "Last Christmas," I began, voice shaking just enough to feel real, "my father threw me and my grandfather out into the snow because my grandfather spilled a piece of turkey on a tablecloth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He thought appearances mattered more than people. He thought kindness was weakness, and money defined worth. I looked up at the huge portrait of Grandpa hanging between two flags, his eyes crinkled in that familiar way. "He was wrong," I said. I told them about a man who had been betrayed, broken, left in a wheelchair, but who still chose to quietly help people for decades. I told them he'd left me $2.3 billion, but that the real inheritance was watching him refuse to let bitterness turn him cruel. "You may feel like you have nothing right now," I said, scanning the room. "You may feel like the world has thrown you outside and locked the door. I know how that feels. But listen to me. You can rebuild. Not by becoming like the people who hurt you, but by refusing to be them." The applause that followed was loud and messy, and full of something that felt like healing. Students lined up afterward to hug me, to tell me their stories, to say they'd never had anyone believe in them like that. Later that night, after Henry was asleep and Evan had wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, I slipped out to the rose garden. The air was cool, grass damp beneath my shoes. I sat on Grandpa's favorite bench, running my fingers over the plaque we'd added, "In honor of George Lane, builder of homes, keeper of hearts." A breeze rustled the leaves. For a moment, I felt a warmth at my shoulder, like a hand resting there. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was something else. Either way, I knew he hadn't really left me. So now I'll turn it to you. If your own father threw you and your grandfather into the snow on Christmas, then you found out your grandfather had rebuilt a secret fortune and handed you the power to expose everything, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly, taken the money, and cut ties? Or would you have taken it to court and watched your own blood go to prison? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and finally telling the truth, even if it meant blowing up your family's image? What did you do? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the next letter we read here on Karma's Letterbox.